Welcome back, dear adventurers, to another exciting chapter of 9 Lives: A Felidian Tale. I'm your host, Owen, and as always, it's an honor to have you join us as we continue to explore the magical world of Felidia. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I want to take a moment to thank all of you for your continued support and enthusiasm. Your love for this story brings life to each twist and turn, and it's a joy to share this journey with you. As always, remember that 9 Lives is designed to be a calming, immersive experience. So find a cozy spot, settle in, and let the world of Felidia guide you into a restful state. Tonight, we follow Finn and his companions as they approach the source of the eerie resonance that has haunted them since they first arrived on the mountain. Led by the wolves to a mysterious island in the lake, they will come face to face with a dangerous force, a mage with a chilling connection to Lyric. With secrets uncovered and the party stranded on a flooded island, they must use everything they've learned to find a way back to safety and a way to save Lyric. So, take a deep breath, relax, and let your imagination guide you through the mist and magic of Felidia. Now let's begin Chapter 12, Echoes of the Bell. As Finn stood at the edge of the mountain path, looking down at the island below, a heavy sense of unease settled in his chest. The mist clung to the edges of the lake like a ghostly veil, swirling slowly in the absence of wind. They had been walking for hours, led by the wolves through the dense forest, but the journey felt like it had taken them deeper into a dream, one where the rules of reality no longer applied. The air vibrated with something that wasn't sound, but Finn could feel it in his bones, an unnatural force that seemed to pulse with every step they took. The lake that stretched before them was wrong too. Its waters had receded, revealing the jagged bed of stone that led to an island, and in the center of that island, towering like an ancient sentinel, stood the bell. Finn couldn't help but feel a chill creep along his spine. This place was soaked in magic. Dark, unsettling magic. He exchanged a glance with Thornwhisker, who stood silently beside him, his large frame rigid, one hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The warrior had been quiet for most of their trek down the mountain, his amber eyes narrowed as if sensing the danger ahead. Even Brightpaw, who had scouted ahead, moved cautiously, his usually sure-footed steps slow and measured. But it was Lyric who worried Finn the most. The bard had been growing more distant ever since they'd begun their ascent days ago. At first it had been subtle, small moments where Lyric's usual jokes faltered or his gaze lingered on something unseen. But now, as they neared the island, Finn could see the change more clearly. Lyric's ears twitched at every movement, his silver-blue fur bristling as though he could hear something the rest of them couldn't. His eyes, usually bright with curiosity, had dulled, clouded with a quiet dread. The silence spell that wrapped around them blocked any sound, leaving them trapped in their own thoughts. Finn wanted to ask Lyric if he was all right, to break through the tense quiet with a reassuring word, but he knew there was no point. They couldn't speak to each other, not while the silence spell held. It was their only protection against the bell's deafening resonance. Still, Finn's chest tightened with the need to reach out, to do something. He tore his gaze away from Lyric and focused on the task ahead, the island, the bell. That was where their answers lay. For days, the resonance had haunted them. First as a distant sound, then a steady pulse that had grown louder and more unbearable with each step. Now, standing on the shore, Finn could feel it vibrating in the air, even through the spell. It wasn't just a sound, it was something alive, something sentient. Brightpaw, standing a few paces ahead, raised his hand, signaling for the group to move forward. His sharp green eyes swept the shoreline, always alert, always calculating. Finn nodded to Thornwhisker, and together the group began their descent down the rocky path, the wolves still shadowing their every step. As they approached the exposed lakebed, the ground beneath their feet grew uneven, the stones slick with moisture. The mist parted before them, revealing the narrow path that led to the island. It was as though the lake itself had been pushed back by the force of the bell's magic, exposing a trail that shouldn't have existed. Finn's heart pounded as they crossed the empty lake. The island loomed closer, the bell's massive silhouette standing out against the swirling fog. The closer they got, the more twisted everything seemed to become. Trees at the island's edge bent unnaturally, their trunks twisted and knotted like ancient bones, and the air grew thicker, heavier, as if weighed down by something unseen. Finn's fur prickled as his eyes darted to the shadows between the trees. There was movement there, small, quick, and unnatural. A rabbit limped past them, its movements jerky, flickering in and out of existence as if caught between two realities. The plants, too, were wrong. Vines curled and writhed along the ground, their leaves a sickly yellow, some growing larger as if pulsing with the strange energy that radiated from the bell. The land itself seemed warped, as though it had been touched by some dark force that twisted nature into a mockery of itself. And then Finn saw it. The figure, standing beside the bell. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. It was Lyric. No, it couldn't be. Lyric was behind them, his form wavering under the weight of the silence spell. But the figure by the bell, his silver-blue fur, the familiar tilt of his head, the same glint in his eyes, it was unmistakable. Except something was wrong. The figure didn't move like Lyric. It was too still, too controlled, and the coldness in his eyes sent a shiver down Finn's spine. Finn glanced back at the real Lyric, whose face had gone pale, his eyes wide with horror. His ears flattened against his head, and his lips moved as if trying to speak, but no sound emerged. He shook his head, his hand lifting weakly as if to ward off the figure standing beside the bell, but the silence trapped them all. That's when the voice came, an echo in their minds. A voice that wasn't Lyric's, but one that crawled under Finn's skin. "Ah, I was wondering how long it would take for one of you to find your way back to me." The voice echoed in their minds, cold, distant, and filled with a strange satisfaction. Finn's eyes widened. He looked back at the real Lyric, whose eyes were now wide with horror. Lyric shook his head, his hand lifting weakly as if to ward off the figure. Brightpaw noticed Lyric's reaction first. His sharp green eyes darted between Lyric and the figure standing by the bell, his body going tense, ready to spring into action. Thornwhisker, ever the warrior, gripped his sword tighter, silently signaling the group to spread out, but they were out of time. The figure by the bell stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Lyric's. "I've waited so long, and now, here you are." Lyric stumbled backward, his mouth opening in a silent plea, but the words, lost in the silent spell, were swallowed by the air. The figure, his cold gaze unwavering, took another step forward. "You don't remember, do you?" The mage's voice echoed in Finn's mind. There was a mocking tone to it now, as if this was all some cruel joke only he understood. "I suppose it was bound to happen after the shattering. So much lost. Scattered." The figure's gaze sharpened, his eyes narrowing as they bored into Lyric. "But I remember. Every shard, every piece of what I was." Finn exchanged a panicked glance with Willowshade, whose violet eyes widened with alarm. The silence between them all felt suffocating, their inability to speak heightening the tension as the mage took another step toward Lyric. The mage's expression softened into something almost pitying, though the coldness in his eyes never wavered. "You're nothing but a fragment, lost and wandering. But I knew you would find your way back here. You couldn't resist, none of you will." Brightpaw growled under his breath, barely containing his rage. His hands moved swiftly in a series of signals to Finn. Attack, circle, cover. But before Finn could respond, the figure raised his hand, and a pulse of dark energy rippled through the air. Finn felt it like a cold wind slicing through him, freezing his limbs, making his fur stand on end. Lyric staggered backward, his eyes wide with terror, his body trembling violently as if something was pulling him, dragging him toward the bell. "No!" Finn's heart screamed, but his voice remained trapped behind the silence spell. Lyric's knees buckled, his form jerking as invisible chains seemed to bind him to the spot. His eyes, filled with desperation, locked onto Finn's. "I've missed you." The figure's voice was almost tender, like a lover's whisper. "You belong to me." The magic flared, and before anyone could act, Lyric's body dissolved into a swirl of mana, the glowing strands twisting and spiraling through the air like torn silk. They coiled around the figure, who greedily absorbed them into his being, his expression one of triumph. The silence spell shattered in an instant, replaced by the deafening roar of the bell's resonance crashing down around them. Finn gasped as the sound slammed into him, sending him reeling to the ground. The noise was unbearable inside his head, beneath his feet, vibrating through the air like a living force. Willowshade collapsed under the weight of it, her hands clamped over her ears as if to block out the sound. Thornwhisker growled low in his throat, struggling to remain upright, but even he was overwhelmed by the force of it. Brightpaw staggered, his sharp eyes darting around, searching for something, anything they could do to stop it. The wolves, once circling them with calculated precision, faltered, their glowing eyes flickering as they scattered, fleeing into the misty forest, their control broken. But Finn couldn't focus on that. He couldn't think of the wolves or the eerie sudden departure. His mind was consumed with one thought. Lyric was gone. The figure beside the bell, the mage, was now towering, his form flickering as the resonance pulsed through him. His eyes, cold and victorious, settled on Finn, as if daring him to act. Finn's heart raced. His friend, his companion, had been taken, absorbed into this twisted reflection of himself, and if they didn't stop him now, they would all be lost. There was no time to think, no time to grieve. The bell was growing stronger by the second, its hum shaking the very ground beneath them. His hammer. Finn's gaze snapped to the weapon Forge had gifted him. His hand trembled as he gripped the handle, his mind racing with every lesson Willowshade and Lyric had taught him. The sound was unbearable, his thoughts unraveling beneath its force, but somehow in the chaos, he found clarity. He could stop the sound. He had to. With trembling hands, Finn began to channel magic into the hammer. He didn't have time to form a perfect spell, there was no time. But he could feel the threads of magic, the resonance wrapping around the weapon. His mind reached out, pulling the silent spell together, weaving it into the core of the hammer. It wasn't perfect, but it would be enough. The bell's hum was rising now, its power growing unbearable, and Finn's arms felt heavy with the weight of the spell. The mage stood tall beside it, his eyes gleaming as if he could sense Finn's intentions. Finn raised the hammer, his breath catching in his throat as the magic surged through him. With a final, desperate cry, he hurled it toward the bell. Time slowed as the hammer spun through the air, glowing faintly with the spell's energy. For a heartbeat, there was silence, an eerie calm as the weapon sailed toward its target. Then the hammer struck. The bell cracked, its deep hum splintering into a high-pitched screech before exploding into 1,000 pieces. A shockwave erupted from the bell, sending shards of metal and magic flying in all directions. The force of the blast slammed into Finn, flinging him backward. He hit the ground hard, the world spinning as the shockwave swept over him. He caught a brief glimpse of the mage's twisted smile as the shockwave swept him away. And then, darkness. That was all Finn knew in the moments after the bell shattered. A deep, suffocating void that swallowed everything. For a while, he wasn't sure if he was still alive, or if the shockwave from the bell had consumed him along with the mage. But slowly, sensations returned. The first thing he felt was the cold, a deep chill that soaked through his fur and into his bones. Rain. He could hear it now, falling in a steady rhythm on the ground around him. He blinked his eyes open, the world around him a grey haze of mist and water. His body ached from the force of the blast, but the pain meant he was alive. With effort, Finn sat up, his mind sluggish and disoriented. He was lying on the island's edge, the rocky ground beneath him slick with mud. The lake, once held back by the bell's magic, was now flooding back in. Water crept steadily toward him, lapping at his boots. The rain poured down harder, the mist swirling around the island, casting an eerie glow over everything. For a moment, Finn just sat there, trying to piece together what had happened. The bell, the mage, Lyric. His heart clenched as the memory hit him. Lyric, being absorbed into the mage's form, his final, desperate glance. Finn's breath quickened, and he scrambled to his feet, scanning the island. The bell was gone, reduced to shattered pieces scattered across the island. The landscape felt wrong, haunted by the magic that had once pulsed through the air. Mist thickened around him, but through the haze he saw movement. Thornwhisker appeared first, his large frame covered in mud, his fur drenched from the rain. His amber eyes locked with Finn's, a grim look of understanding passing between them. Brightpaw emerged next, his golden fur matted with mud, but his eyes alert, sweeping the area for danger. Willowshade followed last, her violet eyes wide with concern as she scanned the ground. "We're trapped," Brightpaw said grimly, looking out at the rising water that was quickly surrounding the island. "The lake's filling back up." Thornwhisker gave a slow nod, his face set in grim determination. "We need to move quickly. The island will be submerged soon." But Finn barely registered their words. His mind was spinning with one thought. Lyric was gone. He swallowed hard, the weight of the loss sinking in. The silence after the bell's destruction was heavy, as if the air itself mourned what had happened. "Lyric?" Finn whispered, his voice hoarse. The others fell silent. Thornwhisker's expression hardened, but he didn't speak. Brightpaw averted his eyes, and Willowshade's gaze softened with quiet sorrow. "We couldn't save him," Willowshade said softly, her voice thick with regret. He's gone." Finn closed his eyes for a moment, his hands clenching into fists. Guilt gnawed at him. He had destroyed the bell, but it hadn't saved Lyric. It had been the right decision, hadn't it? But the emptiness where his friend should be felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. "We have to keep moving," Thornwhisker said firmly, though there was a tension in his voice. "We can mourn later, but we're running out of time." Brightpaw crouched down beside Finn, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. "We should search the island first. Maybe there's something we can use." Finn nodded slowly, forcing himself to focus. They needed to stay sharp, even in the face of loss. Lyric would have wanted that. As they moved through the rain-soaked island, Brightpaw scoured the area, and Willowshade followed, her eyes drawn to the strange, dark fragments of the bell scattered across the ground. Finn followed her gaze and knelt beside one of the larger shards. The shard hummed faintly with a dark energy, twisted but still alive. Finn reached out to touch it, feeling a pulse of magic, weak but lingering. Thornwhisker picked up one of the shards as well, turning it over in his hands. "These shards still hold power," Thornwhisker said quietly. "Whatever magic the mage was using, it's not entirely gone." Brightpaw moved closer, his expression serious. "We can't leave them here. Someone else could stumble upon them and reawaken whatever was controlling the bell." Finn hesitated, looking at the fragments in the mud. He had shattered the bell, but now it seemed its remnants had been left in his hands. He had to carry them. Carefully, he began gathering the shards, his pack growing heavier with each one. The weight felt like more than just metal. It felt like a burden he wasn't sure he was ready for. As Finn stowed away the last shard, something glinted in the mud nearby. He knelt, brushing aside the dirt, and uncovered an old, worn book. The pages were waterlogged and crumbling, but the cover, dark leather etched with strange runes, was still intact. Willowshade stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "What is that?" Finn opened the book carefully, but the text inside was in a language he couldn't understand. The symbols were intricate and foreign, spiraling across the pages like living things. He handed the book to Willowshade, who studied it with a frown. This is old magic," she murmured, tracing a finger over the runes. "Ancient, maybe. I can't read it, but I've seen markings like these in scrolls before." Brightpaw glanced at the book, his eyes narrowing. "Is it connected to the mage?" Willowshade's lips pressed into a tight line. "Possibly. But without knowing what it says, we can't be sure." "We're taking it with us," Thornwhisker said firmly. "We'll need answers later." As Finn tucked the mysterious book into his pack, Brightpaw crouched nearby, inspecting something else half buried in the mud. He pulled out a small glass bottle, wiped it clean, and his sharp eyes narrowed as recognition flickered across his face. "Wait, this is Lyric's elixir," Brightpaw muttered, holding the bottle up. Finn's stomach dropped. The bottle. The elixir they had brewed at the lower shrine. Every member of the party had received one, including Lyric. The mage had taken it when he absorbed Lyric. Finn stared at the bottle, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. The elixirs, they weren't just for protection. The realization hit him like a wave. "The elixirs were part of the ritual," Finn said, his voice low. "Lyric's was taken by the mage, but we still have ours?" Willowshade's gaze sharpened. The elixirs? They weren't just to protect us from the mountain's magic. They were also our way back. Brightpaw's eyes widened in realization. You're saying we can use our elixirs to get out of here? Willowshade nodded, her expression growing more confident. It's a teleportation spell, woven into the potion. If we drink our elixirs, we'll be sent back to the lower shrine. Finn's hand instinctively went to his pack, feeling the small vial tucked safely inside. The water around them was rising quickly, and it was clear they were running out of time. Without hesitation, Finn pulled out his elixir, exchanging determined looks with the rest of the group. Thornwhisker gave a nod of approval, already holding his own bottle. We don't have time to waste, Thornwhisker said, lifting his elixir. One by one, they drank their potions. The warmth of the liquid spread through Finn's body, a soft glow of magic filling him. He closed his eyes, feeling the pull of the spell, and within moments, the world around him shifted, spinning away into light. Finn opened his eyes to the familiar glow of the lower shrine. The sound of rain and the roar of the lake were gone, replaced by the quiet hum of the shrine's magic. His body ached, but the warmth of the shrine's walls and the stillness of the air brought him back to reality. He sat up slowly, blinking away the dizziness as his mind raced to catch up. They had made it off the island. The elixirs had worked. He glanced around and saw his companions nearby. Thornwhisker, Brightpaw, and Willowshade stood in a loose circle, their faces set with grim determination as they looked back at Finn. The tension in the air was thick, and Finn knew they were all thinking the same thing. Lyric was gone, but that didn't mean they were finished. We're all here, Thornwhisker said, his voice steady but heavy. Alive, at least. Brightpaw, his golden fur still damp from the rain, shook his head. But not all of us. Finn swallowed hard, forcing himself to push down the knot of emotion in his throat. He couldn't afford to lose focus now. He stood up, taking stock of their surroundings, his gaze settling on his companions. They had escaped the island, but the weight of what had happened still pressed on them. Willowshade, her violet eyes thoughtful, stepped forward. What happened back there? I've never seen magic like that. The mage. He absorbed Lyric, but I'm not sure that means he's completely gone. Brightpaw crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. He's definitely gone, Willowshade. We watched it happen. I don't know if that's true, Willowshade continued, her brow furrowed. The mage didn't just destroy him, he took him. It wasn't an ending, it was more like a transfer. Finn's heart skipped a beat. The thought that Lyric might not be gone, at least not entirely, stirred something in him. Do you think there's a way to get him back? Willowshade sighed, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. I don't know. But if the mage absorbed him, that could mean he's still in there, somewhere. The question is, how do we free him? Thornwhisker grunted, his arms crossed over his broad chest. We won't figure it out standing here. First we need to rest. Then we get back to the Adventurers Guild and tell them what happened. They'll want to know. Brightpaw nodded, though his sharp green eyes still flickered with frustration. They might know more about this mage. Someone has to have heard of this kind of magic before. Finn glanced at the pack slung over his shoulder, where the shards of the shattered bell rested. The twisted fragments still hummed faintly with residual magic, and the weight of them felt heavier than before. We should bring these with us. The guild needs to know about the bell and the mage. Thornwhisker gave a brief nod. Agreed. They'll want to study them, and maybe find a way to counter whatever magic is still left. Brightpaw crouched beside the pack, reaching into his own bag and pulling out the strange, worn book they had found on the island. There's this too. It's written in some old language. Maybe someone at the guild can translate it. If it's connected to the mage's magic, it could be important. Willowshade took the book from Brightpaw and turned it over in her hands. This kind of magic, ancient, dark, it doesn't just disappear. The guild might be able to find something useful in this. They had some pieces of the puzzle, but not nearly enough to put it all together. Finn's mind raced, thinking about the strange words the mage had spoken before he took Lyric, about the fragments and pieces of himself scattered across the world. Was Lyric just one of those pieces? Was the mage after more? And if he was, how could they stop him? Finn's gaze dropped to his hammer, which rested beside him on the floor. The handle had changed. Dark magic coiled around it like a snake, a faint glow emanating from the wood where his grip had been during the battle. It still felt familiar in his hands, but it was different now, augmented by the mage's twisted magic. "I don't know what this means yet," Finn said, his voice low as he picked up the hammer. "But whatever happened to the bell, it changed my hammer too." Thornwhisker frowned, eyeing the weapon. "That could be dangerous. Dark magic isn't something to mess with lightly." "I know," Finn agreed, gripping the hammer tightly. "But if it's connected to the mage's power, maybe it can help us find a way to stop him." Willowshade nodded thoughtfully, her eyes lingering on the dark coils of magic. "It could, but we need to be careful. Magic like that has a way of latching on. Don't let it control you." Finn nodded, though the uneasy hum of the hammer's magic still lingered in the back of his mind. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but the mage's power had left its mark on him, and on the hammer. He would have to be cautious moving forward. Thornwhisker, ever practical, clapped his hands together, breaking the tension. "Enough for now. We'll rest here tonight, then we head back to Mossborough at first light. The guild will want a full report on everything that's happened." Brightpaw, sitting down on one of the stone benches, stretched his arms and sighed. "Can't say I'm looking forward to that conversation." Thornwhisker's lips curled into a slight smile. "The guild's not all bad, and we need their resources if we're going to figure this out." Finn found a spot on the floor beside his companions and set down his pack, leaning against the smooth stone walls of the shrine. The warmth of the ancient magic within the shrine provided a strange sense of calm, and for the first time since the battle with the mage, he allowed himself to relax, just a little. "We'll figure it out," Thornwhisker said quietly, his deep voice carrying a note of certainty. "We'll find a way to stop the mage, and if there's a way to get Lyric back, we'll find that too." Brightpaw nodded from where he sat, his usual sharpness softened by exhaustion. "We'll need the guild's help for that. They'll know what to do." Finn let out a slow breath, his thoughts still racing but quieter now. It wasn't over. Lyric might still be out there, somewhere inside the mage, and if there was any chance of bringing him back, they had to try. "We'll get him back," Finn said firmly, more to himself than anyone else. As the group settled in for the night, the flickering light of the shrine's torches cast long, soothing shadows on the stone walls. The weight of the bell shards, the book, and his altered hammer rested beside Finn. But for the first time since the island, he felt a glimmer of hope. They had survived the mountain, and though they were battered and exhausted, they had made it through. Now, they had a plan. They would return to Mossborough, then seek out the guild, and figure out what they were up against. The mage had taken Lyric, but the battle wasn't over yet. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new challenges. But tonight, they would rest. And when the time came, they would be ready.